As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
So Israeli Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer has vowed that Israel will invade the southern Gaza city of Rafah, even if it causes a rift with the United States. So any Israeli attack on Rafah, of course, would incur a huge civilian casualties, since there's 1.5 million people packed into the city, many displaced from elsewhere in Gaza. You know, think about the number of people that are there who were in Gaza City, had to evacuate there, went south, had to evacuate. There's people that have had to move multiple times. And most of the Palestinians in Gaza are packed into Rafah. 1.5 million people. The population is about 2.3 million. So the Israelis are saying that they're going to go ahead with this anyway. They claim that they have a plan to protect civilians or evacuate civilians, but the U.S. has actually said Israel has not presented any plan. So Dermer, who he is a former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., and he was actually born in the U.S., so he's American, he said, quote, "We're quite confident that we can do this in a way that would be effective, not only militarily, but also on the humanitarian side. And they have less confidence that we can do it. It will happen even if Israel is forced to fight alone. Even if the entire world turns on Israel, including the United States, we're going to fight until the battle is won," end quote. So, of course, Netanyahu has repeatedly vowed that he will go ahead with the invasion of the city, despite concerns from President Biden. But I don't know if he said anything explicitly as this, saying, even if we're alone without the United States, we're going to go in. This article is from Middle East Eye. And this is based on something reported by a journalist for Israel's Khan News. I haven't seen it anywhere else, but I figured it was worth running this because he is suggesting that the new U.S. built, or which is in the process of being built, this makeshift port off Gaza that Biden has ordered to be created by the U.S. military, he suggested that it could be used to deport Palestinians. And this is, again, according to a journalist in Khan News, that he said this at a private meeting of the Knesset's Foreign Affairs and Security Committee. And again, I haven't seen this anywhere else, but this is something that a lot of people are suspecting that's what he wants out of this pier, that could be part of the plan. Because this, if you remember, there was that report recently that said this was actually all Netanyahu's idea. He floated it back in October, the idea of building a temporary pier. And I think part of the strategy here is them putting as much pressure, starving people, making the place uninhabitable. So eventually, I think they're hoping that the U.S., Egypt, or whoever else says, all right, fine, let's get them out of there. I think that might be part of the thinking here. And so that's what, the U.S. military has deployed to build right off the coast of Gaza. And just the whole idea of it is completely insane. I mean, putting U.S. troops, they're saying that they're not going to go on the ground, but if they're right off the coast, you got to figure Hamas or anybody, a lot of other people in Gaza are, have plenty of motive to try to hit some U.S. troops. And if that happens, I mean, who knows? Imagine the hysteria from Congress. Imagine what they're going to want the U.S. to do if some American troops get killed by Hamas or by a rocket that's fired out of Gaza. Just a mess. So Reuters reported on Thursday that some Western banks are lobbying against an EU plan to use profits made by Russian central bank funds that are frozen in Europe to arm Ukraine. So the European Commission has proposed sending up to 3 billion euros to Ukraine per year using this revenue. And again, this is frozen Russian funds, like the interest and stuff that it's making while sitting in the European banks where it's frozen. So they're talking about giving that interest to Ukraine. And Russia, of course, has criticized this plan and say that they will respond. Maria Zakharova, the Russian foreign ministry spokeswoman, she said on Wednesday, quote, "This is outright banditry and theft. These actions are a gross and unprecedented violation of basic international norms. We said we would respond, and so we shall," end quote. And so these banks they're basically lobbying for the EU not to do this because they're worried that if they're involved in the transactions, it will open them up to legal action, especially in the future eventually you figure these sanctions on Russia will be lifted or eased, and then Russia's going to try to get their money. And so it's going to be a lengthy, they're warning that it could be a legal battle that lasts decades. And they're also warning that it would erode trust in the Western banking system, saying that stealing these funds would amount to the weaponization of foreign-held reserves and assets. And the U.S. is looking to take an even more extreme measure. The U.S. wants to give all the Russian funds to Ukraine, not just the money made on the interest, all of it. And Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen came out very strongly in favor of this idea last month. And now there is legislation that's been introduced in Congress that has a lot of co-sponsors, hasn't been voted on yet, but this is something that I wouldn't be surprised if we see the U.S. do. So about $300 billion in Russian central bank funds are frozen in the U.S., the EU, Japan. I think there might be some in Canada. Most of it's in Europe, over $200 billion, and the U.S. has $67 billion, and that's around the number that Biden's trying to get authorized for Ukraine. He's trying to get another $61 billion. So they're thinking about just taking this money to send to Ukraine. And it's something I know that Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, has said he favors, but it would be an unprecedented step. The U.S. freezes stuff all the time, although they do steal Iranian oil and sell it off. But this is a little more extreme just because of the sheer numbers that we're talking about here.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
This is great. This was an article from Reuters. You ready? U.S. IRS chief, Internal Revenue Service, sees workforce topping 100,000 within 3 years. Isn't that great? So they can steal more money from us to give to their military-industrial complex and all their friends. Yeah. So, again, we make sure that every penny that we have is clear because we know they'll come after somebody like me. February home sales spiked 9.5%, the largest monthly gain in a year. Again, when interest rates went up and everybody said in the mainstream media that home prices would go down, we said, no way, no how. They're going to keep going up. Matter of fact, I just bought another one, another piece of real estate. Most of the people aren't going to be able to afford it, but when you have a country of 332 million people, you got a lot of people within that number that could keep buying stuff. Stretched U.S. shoppers start to hold back on spending. This is from the Financial Times yesterday. Retail sales increased 0.6% in February from the previous month, missing expectations of 0.8. The increase reversed a 1.1% decline from December to January. Oh, no, I thought they told us that they increased. Yeah, they're rigging the numbers. The numbers are going down. We're just nothing more than plantation workers of Slavelandia. Gucci owner Kering tanks 14% after Asia profit warning, dragging down Europe luxury brands. Old news trends, journal subscribers. We've been writing about this for months and months and months and months. Go back to Asia. Thank China. Launched the COVID war on January 2020, in celebration of their Chinese Lunar New Year, the year of the rat, and locked down the joint for 3 years with their zero COVID policy. The economy boomed when they were brought into the World Trade Organization in 2 weeks after 9/11, when people weren't paying attention. Whew, they overbuilt like any boom. So the real estate boom was about to bust anyway, but this made a very bad situation worse. That's why you're seeing the luxury sales go down, because the Chinese were traveling all over the world, buying up stuff like crazy, ain't doing it no more. It's very important to see the luxury brands. You know why? Because you can see how the economy goes down. You know, the fish rots from the head down. Gabish. So the top is rotten. Austin commends allies for support of Ukraine. He said, Ukraine's battle remains one of the great causes of our time. Hey, Austin, you know what?
Bullshit.
You're full of
Bullshit.
Austin just speaks.
Bullshit.
What do you mean the greatest cause of our time? This fucking stuff been going on between Russia and Ukraine for what? Since Catherine the Great? Not my concern. I'm an American. I'm concerned about the people flooding into this country, the IRS with 100,000 people, the streets filled with homeless, migrants, crime rising, taxes going up. That's what I'm concerned about. Fuck you, Salenti. You're not a warmonger. We hate you because you launched Occupy Peace. Oh, but over a decade ago. The United States would face grave new perils in a world where aggression and autocracy are on the march, and where tyrants are emboldened, and when dictators think they can wipe democracy off the map. Oh, you mean you're talking about Israel? Is that what oh, no, I forgot. You're talking about Russia. Today's Ukrainian survival is a danger, and American security is at risk. Total fucking
Absolute bullshit.
absolute bullshit. Where are the people? World War III has begun. Get it in your head. French army ready for war, top general. All right? French General Pierre Schill. Yeah, real fucking Schill. Told Le Monde, whatever the developments in the international situation, the French can be convinced their soldiers will respond. He said it's an internet. Hey, soldiers will respond. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, fuckface. Like you said, Napoleon sent 420,000 to attack Moscow in 1812 and came back with 10,000. Oh, those soldiers, I forgot. Poor guys died for nothing. Goes on. President Macron, goes on. More war. Western troops in Ukraine, an open secret. That's that guy, Polish Foreign Minister Sikorsky says this. That in an interview with DPA on Wednesday, Sikorsky stated, as your chancellor, speaking in Germany, Olaf Scholz said, there are already some troops from big countries in Ukraine. All right? German aid to boost Kyiv's artillery stocks. $500 million. Keeps going on and on and on. EU leaders urge to put economies on war footing as Ukraine negotiations falter. This is from The Guardian. On Thursday, prime ministers, the meeting, a sense of urgency and immediacy, expected to examine contentious plans to confiscate billions of euros from Russia. Charles Michel, the president of the European Council, said, quote, now that we are facing the biggest security threat since the Second World War, this is such fucking bullshit. It is high time we take radical and concrete steps to be defense ready and put the EU's economy on a war footing. Isn't that great? Germany's in a recession. People are having a very difficult time, but more money for the military-industrial complex. When all else fails, they take you to war.
Live from Run Your Mouth World Headquarters. It's today's Run Your Mouth Kilo. All right, next up, this is from Mish Talk. Green wave in reverse, Biden rolls back EV mandates, but not enough. This is one of those stories that we love to cover here of how many times people are sitting down, they're trying to make business decisions, and then new government policy comes around that entirely ruins their plans. So, for example, you think government's going to force you to switch to all electric vehicles, and so you make switches to plants that are less profitable. You train people in processes that are different than the actual cars. You don't invest in the research and development of gas engines, and then all of a sudden government realizes, oh, they can't enforce all these mandates, and so you actually have more time. And I'm just saying, how do you even do the calculation of how much gets lost in the process of thinking you have to do something or you're going to be in trouble with government, and then realizing, oh, we can change course? Just think about how much economic growth gets lost every single year as people are just trying to make decisions about what will government let me do, as opposed to what would be the best products and services for my customers, as opposed to sitting around and thinking, how do I create more value? How do I create a better experience? How do I make a better product? How do I get this to market? Instead of sitting down and having all those meetings, instead, everyone's just sitting around trying to figure out government instead, and just think about how much wasted brain power and just how much time is wasted when you spend an entire year drumming up specific plans thinking that there's a regulation that's coming and it just doesn't come. Now, what was fascinating about this article is that they're talking about in California, there's already massive increases in everybody's electricity bills. And you guys can go check out the article. It's kind of technical, but it also talks about what is that going to look like if California actually goes to 100% electric vehicles? What's going to actually happen to everyone's electric bills? And then what's going to be the plan when poor people can't run their air conditioners in the summer? Or what are you going to do when people's refrigerators cost 4 times more to run? What is the plan? If people are already pissed off about 13% increases in their electric bill, what's going to happen when suddenly all cars are mandated to be electric and you haven't updated the electricity grid to be ready for that? Now, the other part that makes this interesting is that they were pitching that it's actually becomes cheaper, I guess, on a weekly basis to fill your tank, because you don't actually have to fill your tank. I'm saying like the amount that you're spending per charge to get a certain amount of miles. And on some cars, the math on that has already changed because general electricity prices are up. Well, what's that going to look like when everyone's forced to be in an electric vehicle? And so what this points to is exactly what we experienced with COVID, where we were sitting around and we're like, wait, everyone's just not going to work, and that's going to be better. Or what about everyone that's miserable because they're not working? What about suicide rates? What about alcoholism? What about kids not being in school? What about the entire way the natural immunity thing works? And if everyone just goes out there and they get sick, then we can move on with it. And wait, why you tell me that this new vaccine is actually better? Remember all those little thoughts that we were having when you were just looking at the government policy and they're like, well, you can't ask those questions? That's socialism across the board. And it's the same thing with the electric vehicles and them just going, we need everyone to be on board on the movement to electric. Well, can the grid even handle that? What will the cost look like if they don't ask those questions? We just need everybody on board. And it's funny because we're only in, I guess, the first couple of years of them trying to make these changes, and it's already falling apart on them. This is a worthwhile watch because you get to see how I bet we could even take the government scientists and they would fold under this questioning. And if you ever need to be persuasive, Kennedy's got some good tricks with just the how questions, or can you define that? Can you tell me what the alternative would be? Just really simple questions where when people do know absolutely nothing about what they're talking about, they fold pretty quickly. Let's give it a watch, and that will be our episode. Here we go.
Senator Kennedy.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Vice Chairman. Mr. Schumacher, welcome. You were, who invited you here today?
I came with Protect Our Winters.
Right. But you're here on behalf of the Democrats or the Republicans?
I'm here on behalf of the outdoor enthusiasts around America.
Okay. You were contacted
I'm here for the trees.
by Senator Whitehouse's staff?
I personally came with Protect Our Winters, so I don't know how that went
Okay.
exactly.
What is carbon dioxide?
I went to high school, but that's carbon dioxide is a gas.
Yo, bro, I just like ski a bunch. I don't know about all that stuff.
Okay.
I'm not a professional to talk about carbon dioxide so much, but
Well, you want us to abolish it, right?
no, there's always going to be carbon dioxide.
Right. So what is it you want us to do?
I
Let me back up because I want to, I mean, you're here as an expert. Tell me more about what carbon dioxide is.
I'm here as an expert cross-country skier who sees the changes in my winters and the landscape that I live in Alaska. And so carbon dioxide is...
Changes in your winters. What are you, 18? Or what is this kid, 22? So let's just say since 18, he's been observing it. I ski 2 days a year every single season. And let me tell you something, it's different every single year. There's no pattern to it. If I'm trying to ski in the Northeast, I mean, if anything, I've started to notice ski later because there seems to be more snow later. I don't know why that is. It used to be December was a better month. I guess I've noticed that one singular pattern. But believe me, there's plenty of mountains with snow and there's different snowfall every single season. But what exactly was your documentation process that you're like, yeah, there's like a little bit less powder this year? All right, let's continue. I don't need to be even asked these questions. Kennedy's got it.
What I see it as is, it's a gas that exists in our atmosphere. And
What? Is it the major part of our atmosphere? Or?
it's a huge part of our atmosphere, yeah.
It's actually a very small part of our atmosphere.
Well, okay. But, yeah, I don't know. What are you asking specifically?
Well, you said we need to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. I'd like to know first if you know what it is. You want us to abolish fossil fuels?
I never said that.
You never have said that?
No.
Okay. What do you think we ought to do with fossil fuels?
What will we do with fossil fuels?
Yeah. Should we make any changes?
I would like to see a decrease in the use of fossil fuels. I think there's a possibility to use more electric generation.
Okay. Over what period of time? 10 years, 50 years, 100 years?
I would like to see it come as fast as possible while continuing.
How fast?
Sorry?
How fast?
I don't have a
You
good
don't
answer
know?
for that. No.
Okay. You just think, well,
Let me tell you, this was me the couple times I actually went on a real finance interview and they're like, hey, can you do this math riddle? I'm like, no, but this is absolutely just getting caught with their pants down. I can't even believe this kid showed up for this.
All right, so everybody knows that the national defense budget is only $800 and something billion a year. So what's with this crazy headline of yours here?
Well, that they're very careful to. I mean, the number is still obscenely large, but they're sort of careful to leave out all sorts of very relevant national security activities. And as we try to point out, that the real number, if you count in, everything that your dollar and taxpayer dollar and mine goes to for the cause of national security, we're heading towards 2 trillion. I mean, we're in 1 trillion point 767 right now and rising sharply.
Amazing. So help walk us through this. How do we get from 800 billion to almost another trillion on top of that?
Well, so the problem is that they, as I say, they leave out a lot of stuff. Things like the amount we spend on nuclear weapons. Nuclear warheads, the bombs, the newer bombs, the bigger bombs, the smaller bombs, and that funneled through the Department of Energy, and that comes to $37 billion, not a small sum. Then there's like 26 billion for military pensions and healthcare, which is, again, if we, very obviously very pertinently part of it. Another 12 billion for the selective service operation. And then, as Winslow Wheeler points out, there's something very mysterious. There's a suspicious-looking category for the international activities of the FBI, which they refuse to tell us what that is. It's just lumped under defense-related activities. So, and then going on down the list, there's a huge chunk for the money we pay to, the interest on the debt for the money, the debt that we borrowed, the money we borrowed to finance all this in the first place. So that comes to $254 billion. So once you start adding it all up, as I say, we're heading for $2 trillion.
Yeah, it's amazing. And then, of course, there's also, as you guys talk about in the piece here, you and Winslow Wheeler, you have this kind of separate war budget. So if we give billions of dollars to Israel, to Ukraine, to Taiwan, to whoever, that doesn't get counted in the original defense budget, right?
Right. That's where they've announced this budget. And then what's going to happen is they'll tack on things as needs be for Israel, for Ukraine, for Taiwan, for something called the Defense Industrial Base, which is a lot of money handed out to corporations to build plants, to step up production facilities for artillery shells or whatever. Yeah. So they've been able to present this year. They say, oh, look, we're spending less this year. We're projected to spend less, actually, for next year, which is the budget we're talking about, than we did this year. But that's just sleight of hand, because by the time they've tossed in all these other ingredients, it'll be higher.
Yeah.
So, essentially, this is you really have to realign your sort of political classifications. Like at the State of the Union, Congressman Thomas Massey, he had Julian Assange's brother, Gabriel Shipton, sitting beside him, as an honored guest. I didn't see much coverage of that given in the reports on the speech, but it was a noble effort. Actually, there's quite a few. There is a little sort of congressional movement, I don't know if you can call it a caucus, protesting at the treatment of Assange, which is bipartisan. You have like Massey, who's considered normally, or is a conservative Republican, Ray McGovern, who's a liberal Democrat. So there are a few honorable figures who, see this for what it is, but, they're very much in the minority.
Yeah, man, it's really too bad. And, because of partisanship, it's so hard to build the real consensus of, of the American people that we just absolutely won't tolerate this. Maybe we will, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's being shredded. The control, obviously, what happened, there's been a concerted effort. The internet sort of got out of control for a while, and there were all sorts of things, information freely available to people, which caused people to, go in directions that the establishment didn't care for. And there's been this concerted effort to bring the social media, which I guess they're worried about with the internet, bring social media under control, and the whole, that's what the Twitter files revealed. Thank goodness Mr. Musk, for a brief moment at least, was prepared to, for whatever reason, to let that happen, to release what Twitter had been doing in terms of cooperating with the government, with the FBI, to suppress free speech. But I have the worst forebodings, especially this horrifying statement by the, beloved liberal Justice Ketanji Brown, saying, the government being hamstrung by the First Amendment. Isn't that that whirring sound must be Thomas Jefferson or James Madison whirring in their graves. But
seriously,
that's where we are.
Yeah, it's just amazing that she could even utter something like that out of her own mouth and not think, oh, what the hell am I saying? That's what the First Amendment. How about, am I allowed to choose my church? Are you going to figure that out for me too, lady, huh?
Oh, yeah, yeah, right, yeah, exactly.
Oh, if the First Amendment doesn't mean what it says, and I guess they can just outlaw, I don't know, Presbyterians. I hear they're pretty soft on supporting Israel.
Oh, yeah, they better watch out. They'll be in the lineup. There's even a few Baptists around the place who might be considered undependable.
Yeah, can't have that.
Yeah, really feel like, we're being boiled like frogs, It's,
The Peter Schiff Show.
The press conference, I thought, was another very dovish conference by Powell. And the markets agreed because the Dow Jones and the S&P rallied to record highs. In fact, the Dow closed up better than 400 points. We're above 39,500. So we're almost going to hit 40,000 on the Dow. We'll probably be there pretty soon, given the green light that Powell gave to the speculators to go out and buy risk assets. Now, not just risk assets, safe haven assets. Gold rose about $30 during the U.S. session. GLD, which is the U.S. ETF, closed at a record high close. It didn't have a record high intraday, but the close was a record high. Now, already this evening, gold added another $15 to that run, hitting a new all-time record high. Gold traded above $2,200 an ounce for the first time ever, and silver had an even stronger day than gold. As I've been saying on this podcast, silver is the real buy. I mean, gold's a good buy too, but silver's an even better buy, and it's now almost $26 an ounce. But it's got a long way to go, and I think both gold and silver are going to rise. The dollar fell on the news; it didn't fall enough. I think it's going to fall a lot more. Commodities in general, I posted again. Just look at it, the chart for the CRB. This thing is going to rip. I mean, this is a beautiful looking chart. Commodity prices. Oil was down today. That's because it had got up to 83 and it pulled back, and it's about 81.65. But copper jumped up big again today. Not as much as silver, but it was a good move. But I think we're on the verge of the biggest bull market in commodities since the 1970s. Of course, this flies in the face with Powell claiming that inflation is going to go back down to 2%. There's no chance that inflation is going to go back down to 2%. All the data shows that inflation is on the way up. Plus, if you understand what inflation is, it's got nowhere to go but up. And that, I think, is why the markets reacted the way they did, because Powell basically dismissed the bad inflation news that came out for January and February. I mean, he kind of said, well, it's due to seasonal effects. Well, it's already adjusted for that. So it's like you can't say it's seasonal when the numbers are already seasonally adjusted. It's like saying it's transitory, which basically is what he said. So he dismissed it. And the Fed is still saying that we're going to get 3 rate cuts this year. But in addition to that, the even more dovish than that was the admission by Powell that they're going to begin shortly in reducing the size of their asset sales, quantitative tightening. They're going to pare it back. So they're going to start shrinking the balance sheet more slowly. Now, I've been saying the Fed is going to go back to quantitative easing. This is just the first step in that process. First thing they do is less QT, and then the next thing, they're back to QE. The February budget deficit came out, and the government reported almost a 13% increase in the deficit from the prior year. And in fact, the deficit in February was the biggest deficit in any February in history, with the sole exception of February of 2021. Now, what was going on in February of 2021? The COVID stimulus checks. And so outside of this crazy year of COVID, we just had the biggest February deficit in our history, and we're supposedly in a booming economy. Everybody who talks about the economy talks about how strong it is. I was listening to Jeremy Siegel, was on CNBC today, talking about our booming economy, our strong economy, and everybody agrees we've got this really strong economy. Well, why do we have record high deficits? If the economy is so strong, where are all the tax revenues that this strong economy is supposed to be generating? Why are so many people getting government checks? And also, the amount of money the government spent in February of 2024 is 50% more than it spent in February of 2020, which was right before COVID started. So that was the last normal year, right before we went off into the twilight zone. But government spending is up 50% from where it was 4 years ago, and there's no emergency anymore. We have supposedly record low unemployment. How is that possible? Where is the government getting all this money to spend 50% more than it spent 4 years ago? This is why we have inflation. It's driving prices higher. All this money is being spent. How can it not bid up prices? And this is why the Fed is not only going to taper the QE program, the QT program, but go back to quantitative easing, because government spending is going ballistic. And all of it is stoking the fires for inflation. Powell said in his prepared remarks right off the bat that the Fed's interest rate policy has been putting downward pressure on inflation. No, it hasn't. There's no downward pressure. from 5.25%, 5.5% interest rates. Those rates are still too low. They've done nothing to stop runaway government borrowing and spending, and nothing to stop runaway consumer borrowing and spending.
But many friends of liberty, generally supporters of the right to keep and bear arms, the Second Amendment, they've fallen into a trap. And what they're doing, by accident possibly, is they're using a pro-gun grabber view of the right to keep and bear arms, that it doesn't exist as an individual right, but instead only as a collective right and only for the National Guard. And they're using that same framework to tell us the Defend the Guard Act has a fatal flaw. Hopefully this is going to make some sense here. First, to Mike Meharry, he points out that Defend the Guard is a state-level bill that would stop the deployment of a state's National Guard units unless specific constitutional criteria are met. It would prohibit deployment to active duty combat unless Congress has passed a declaration of war or taken official action pursuant to Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution to explicitly call forth the Guard for one of three enumerated purposes: to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress insurrections, to repel invasions. Those of you who have read the Constitution and do so regularly, which I do encourage, will recognize this language coming from Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the Constitution, which says the Congress shall have power to provide for calling forth the militia to execute the laws of the Union, suppress insurrections, and repel invasions. And also Article 1, Section 8, Clause 16. These are the militia clauses. Congress shall have power to provide for organizing, arming, and disciplining the militia, and for governing such part of them as may be employed in the service of the United States, reserving to the states, respectively, the appointment of the officers and the authority of training the militia according to the discipline prescribed by Congress. Now, I think much of this really comes from Henry Knox, the Secretary of War, his plan for the militia, which he sent to George Washington in early 1790, and part of it says this: an energetic national militia is to be regarded as the capital security of a free republic and not a standing army forming a distinct class in the community. Now, finally, we're going to get to it. Here's where the gun grabber argument comes in. Of course, we know there are people who absolutely hate the natural right of self-defense. They hate the right to keep and bear arms, and they want to twist the meaning of the Second Amendment. They want us to believe that it has nothing to do with an individual right to keep and bear arms. Well, it really has. It's a restriction on government to not infringe on the natural right of self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms of individuals. They want us to believe that it is only a collective right. It can only be exercised by people who are in the militia, and the people to them who are in the militia are just the National Guard. So there are people, and there are a growing number of people in the gun grabbing community who want to push things forward to say that unless you are signed up for the Guard, you have zero right to keep and bear arms, unless they just decide to give you permission. So it'll be up to them. Patrick Henry first. Here he is in the Virginia Ratifying Convention telling us that the great object is that every man be armed. So he was very concerned about these militia clauses, because when he read them, he was warning. He's like, well, what if Congress doesn't arm everybody? Then we're going to run into a problem. We should be able to take responsibility for arming ourselves here in Virginia, for example. He said, when this power is given up to Congress without limitation or bounds, how will your militia be armed? You trust to chance. For sure I am that the nation which shall trust its liberties in other hands cannot long exist. So he warned that if you pass these militia clauses in 15 and 16 in Article 1, Section 8, then you are relying on Congress doing the right thing. It doesn't require them to arm the entire body of the people. It doesn't require them to fulfill this great object that every man be armed. It just gives them the power to decide to or not. And Patrick Henry did not like that. He was concerned that this would actually, if you think about it, and we'll get a little from Luther Martin on this in just a moment, but if you think about it, if they don't arm everybody, if the population at large is not armed, they're going to be more reliant on professionals, the standing army, the bane of liberty. Anyways, now, if you think about this argument, the Second Amendment does not say a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the militia to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. No, it says the right of the people. So instead of rejecting this argument that the Second Amendment, or the right to keep and bear arms, only applies to members of the active duty militia, the National Guard, instead of rejecting this as totally absurd, these so-called supporters, or I'm sure the intention is good, but they're really playing defense, and they tacitly accept part of the gun-grabbing argument. If the National Guard is the militia, the entirety of the militia, instead of just the organized part of it, and the right to keep and bear arms can only be restricted to the Guard, then of course, instead of just saying your argument is dumb and wrong, they're saying, well, then the National Guard isn't the militia. The right to keep and bear arms only applies to the militia. They're actually accepting that view. Now, Anti-Federalists repeatedly warned that the militia clauses would be used basically the way that we're seeing them used, to decimate the militia, the general population, the people, the whole people, as George Mason put it, in favor of a standing army, the bane of liberty. And here's how Luther Martin put it in January of 1788. He said, when a government wishes to deprive their citizens of freedom and reduce them to slavery, it generally makes use of a standing army for that purpose and leaves the militia in a situation as contemptible as possible, lest they might oppose its arbitrary designs. He was very concerned that the bulwark of liberty, the militia, the armed people of each state, would be decimated by these clauses in the Constitution. He said, in this system, we give the general government every provision it could wish for, and even invite it to subvert the liberties of the states and their citizens, since we give them the right to increase and keep up a standing army as numerous as it would wish, and by placing the militia under its power, enable it to leave the militia totally unorganized, undisciplined, and even to disarm them. And ultimately, this is the kind of system that we have today. They've disregarded this goal that every person be armed, instead creating this professional kind of elite type of a force that George Mason warned about. And therefore, it encourages more of a standing army because, as James Madison told us, the best defense against calls for a large permanent standing army is to have a strong, powerful militia so you don't have to call on that professional force all the time.
Headline here is, quote, invasion, which it is. It's an invasion. And I think they should have used that from the beginning. The first time I got involved in using that word was in 1987. I was a candidate, to run in the Libertarian Party, and they were not totally sold on me being the candidate, and they thought I might be just conservative and that sort of thing. But they came up on immigration, and they didn't think I had a strong enough position. I said, I have a problem with it. I didn't argue and say, I know all the answers. I said, I have a problem with it. What happens when this immigration turns into an invasion? And it was hints of what was happening. And with our system of justice and welfare, it is. And more people, it's commonly used now, invasion, and that's the correct term to use. Now, this article on Zero Hedge says, invasion, riot erupts after migrants swarm breaches in U.S. southern border. National Guard left helpless. That tells you so much going on and where we are. And the National Guard, and then Texas tried to pass a law to clarify and say, we have the right to defend our state. And of course, it's in the courts, it's back and forth, there's been some stays, and they're arguing, and I guess eventually the Supreme Court has to settle this. Does a state have the right to stop the invasion, which is an invasion, come in and using up the facilities and getting in people's houses and going into schools and hospitals and all. If they don't have the right to do something about this, then we're in a big problem. But we've been in a big problem, and the Department of Justice is the case. Just think of in the last several years getting involved in the political things where the Department of Justice is controlled sometimes by our social media, and the social media will tell who to ban, who to cancel, and it's a collusion. So that's, people throw the word fascist around carelessly, but at least we're talking about is corporatism, where the corporations, whether it's pharmaceuticals or whether it's a military industrial complex, the collusion of big business and big government is very, very powerful, and they deserve the term to be used maybe cautiously. Is this fascism? Well, certainly leaning toward fascism. It's been predicted by Mises that if we continue to have the system we have now of corporatism, it does evolve into fascism, and that becomes much more militant and authoritarian. But that is the big problem that we have, and that is the reason why people have to wake up to this. So I think that the people now are sick and tired of this. And the whole idea, what is the position of the states? I'll tell you what, I would predict to say if somebody did deep research at the founding of this country, I'll bet you the states would have been, very rebellious against what was going on if they said, oh yeah, we're going to join, and you guys can come in here from the Washington and dictate to us how to keep peace and order. They wouldn't even have signed up, I believe. But it's going to continue until we look at this on a basic principle of what the states are allowed to do. I think the states right now are just pushed around overly so from the federal government, but what are you going to do if the federal government is corrupt? We have a problem there. It's a philosophic about a basic understanding of what real liberty means to all of us.
We see throughout history there's a common human error that keeps repeating itself. We're living through it right now, and that's the idea that if you destroy everything, then you'll be able to build back your utopia on the ashes. This goes back to the Soviets, to the French Revolution. This keeps repeating itself, where people, they don't like what they see, so they figure, let's just destroy everything, and then we'll start over and build back better. You know, society is not built that way. It's not built from the top down. It's not built at all. You know, it's not a bunch of dudes sitting around a table with a blueprint and they're going to implement their plans. Society flourishes first from moral principles. There has to be a common morality among the people first. You know, that has to be adopted, because if you don't have that, then the rest doesn't matter. Private property, sound money, voluntary interactions, none of that happens if you first don't have that moral principle. Western civilization had a common moral principle. It's called Christianity. Our country, same thing. That was the foundation, and then everything else. Private property. I won't hurt you, you don't hurt me. This is mine, this is yours. Let's come together and exchange voluntarily. Let's have sound money. Well, the destroyers look at this, and they want to destroy it. So the first thing you do is you abandon all morality. All of it has to go. And then you start destroying. Private property is gone. Sound money is gone. Equality under the law is gone. You know, it all just gets peeled away. And they do destroy. The Soviets destroyed. All the communists around the world and all those, they definitely destroyed. But guess what? It stays destroyed. They build absolutely nothing on top of the ashes. What has to happen is the people say, you know, these people are nuts. We need to start over with a moral foundation, and then you start building there. You know, this is what's happening to our country. Our morality has been flushed down the toilet, and everything else has followed. So we need to turn around first by respecting each other, our property, and then going from there.
Very good. People do know what's right and wrong, but they would like to blacken their minds out, and they are indoctrinated to think, well, you know, if people have something else, I have a right to take it from them. Oh, that's not stealing, and they become nihilists. They don't believe telling lies make a difference, and that's the type of system that we live in today. But I think that can be changed. I think the interest in true liberty is growing, not diminishing. But the problems and the consequence of the last 100 years of this development of this authoritarian collectivism is hitting home, and it's struggling to survive with a free society versus the advancement stage to what Mises warned us about, and that is on to an authoritarian state like communism or any one of the others ruthless things. So that is the challenge, and it's up to people to do that. And we will not get it from our average college professor, but we have to get it from elsewhere, and that's where I get optimistic. There's more of it available. Yes, you have to pick and choose because there's a lot of trash out there, even in the internet. But we're on the internet, and I'll tell you what, we're participating in spreading a message, and I meet every day a new person that has their own theme and their own method of spreading this message. And I think that's what we should look to and encourage. And indeed, I want to thank everybody for that participation and for supporting our program. And please come back soon to the Liberty Report.